The first sound Daniel Brooks heard that night wasn't the explosion. It was a low, urgent growl from the hallway, deep, vibrating unmistakably from Ranger. The sound sliced through the silence like a warning bell, jolting Daniel awake with a gut punch of dread. He sat up in bed, heart thudding wildly. His wife, Leah, was already stirring beside him. Then came the frantic scratching at Ava's door. Before either of them could react, the door burst open. Ranger, solid, muscular, laser-focused, charged into their 1-year-old daughter's nursery. "Ranger, no!" Leah screamed, throwing off the blanket. But the dog didn't hesitate. In one swift, deliberate movement, he reached Ava's crib, gripped the edge of her pajamas with his teeth, gentle, precise, and pulled her out. Daniel lunged forward, but Ranger was already halfway down the hall, cradling their startled baby in his powerful jaws like a living rescue mission. They screamed his name, confusion and fear pouring through them as they gave chase. Ranger barreled through the back door, pushing it open with his shoulder, and vanished into the darkness of the backyard. Leah and Daniel followed, breathless, barefoot, into the cold night air. And that's when the world behind them erupted. The explosion ripped through the quiet suburban night. A shockwave of heat knocked them to the ground. Their home, every photo, every wall, every memory burst into fire and smoke. Wood splintered, glass shattered, flames roared. Leah's scream tore through the night. "Ava!" Through the haze, through the falling ash and chaos, Daniel saw him, Ranger. His black and tan coat was singed, his body curled protectively around their baby girl. Ava was crying, but alive, unharmed. Daniel dropped to his knees, lungs burning, hands shaking. He reached out and gathered his daughter into his arms, sobbing with relief. Only then did he understand. Ranger hadn't gone mad. He had saved them. Long before that night, before he lay curled in the burning grass, shielding a baby from a firestorm, Ranger had worn a different name, Kane, a German shepherd trained by federal authorities for chemical and gas detection. His nose, his handler once said, was a marvel, able to identify threats in microscopic concentrations. Kane worked with precision, loyalty, silent discipline, but during a high-risk operation at an illegal chemical lab, his handler, his partner, his closest bond, was killed in an explosion. That loss shattered something deep inside the dog. Kane stopped responding to commands, withdrew, stopped eating, growled when approached. The agency labeled him unstable, unfit for further service. They sent him to a shelter for specialized dogs. Months passed. No one came for him, too large, too intense, too damaged. His file was eventually marked with a deadline. If no one adopted him by month's end, he would be euthanized. And that's when Leah walked in. She had worked for years in animal behavior therapy, but something about Kane, still called that then, made her pause. It wasn't aggression in his eyes. It was grief. Trauma misread as danger. Leah didn't treat him like a broken animal. She treated him like a soul in mourning. Every therapy session became a quiet conversation. No commands, no pressure. She used scent work, calming touch, slow, steady routine. Some days they sat in silence, Kane watching the wind move through the trees. Other days she guided him through memory-based exercises, pairing gentle commands with soft praise. The breakthrough came not in a grand moment, but a quiet one. After weeks of avoidance, Kane lay down at her feet. It wasn't obedience. It was surrender, not to control, but to safety. That was the moment Leah knew. He wasn't lost. He was waiting for someone to speak his language. She petitioned to continue his rehabilitation under her care. She gave him a new name, Ranger, a fresh start for a soul that had seen too much. When Leah brought Ranger home, Daniel was hesitant. A dog with a trauma record in their home? But Leah's decision wasn't impulsive. It was deeply personal. She saw herself in Ranger, someone who had endured loss, who carried invisible wounds. When she adopted him, she told the center, he doesn't need a handler, he needs a family. And so, Ranger came home. Leah wasn't pregnant then. She and Daniel were still settling into their new life, finding rhythm, balancing work. The pregnancy came months later, unexpected and complicated, Low energy, nutritional issues, high stress. Daniel, a construction engineer, did what he could. But most days, he was gone before dawn and home after dark. He worried constantly, but Leah reassured him she'd manage. Neither of them expected that it would be Ranger who stepped in. He became her shadow, not out of anxiety, out of purpose. He followed her room to room, settled beside her through nausea, exhaustion, and emotional lows. He didn't ask, he just stayed, always between her and anything that might harm her. When Ava was born, Ranger stepped forward gently, sniffed her, then lay down beside the crib, his silent promise made. Visitors commented on how calm he was, but Leah knew better. It wasn't calm, it was purpose. He had found his mission again. The signs were subtle at first. Ranger stopped eating. Then came the pacing, circular, restless, from living room to hallway to vent. Some nights he sat by the floor grates, ears alert, nose twitching. He'd whimper low and long, staring at the baseboards like something was coming. Then the basement door. He scratched at it, once, twice. Then looked at Leah, eyes sharp, pleading. Daniel brushed it off. Probably raccoons under the house. Leah wasn't so sure. Ranger began blocking Ava from crawling near the vents. If Leah sat near a wall, Ranger would lie between them and the heater, his body a shield. Early mornings he'd bark once, just once, then sit motionless until noticed. He was trying to speak. They just didn't understand. The night it happened, the air felt wrong, still, tense. Leah had just put Ava to sleep. Daniel was in the kitchen, washing bottles. Ranger lay in the hallway, head on his paws, but eyes wide open. At 11:12 p.m., he sprang up. No bark, no warning. He sprinted down the hall, turned sharply into Ava's room, pulled back the blanket with his teeth, nudged her once, then again, then gently gripped her onesie and began to pull. Leah heard the growl. She rushed down the hall. "What are you doing?" she cried, half panicked. Daniel dropped the bottle and ran after her. They turned the corner and saw their baby, half asleep, being pulled from her crib by the jaws of their dog. Time froze. Fear crashed through reason. Had something snapped? Leah screamed. Daniel lunged forward. "Ranger, stop!" But Ranger didn't. He barreled through the back door and vanished into the night. They chased, and then the world exploded. The roar was deafening. Flames, smoke, heat. Their house, gone. Every memory, every piece of their lives, gone. Leah screamed again. "Ava!" Through the smoke they saw him. Ranger, his fur scorched, curled around their baby on the grass. She was crying, covered in ash, but alive. Daniel collapsed beside them, clutching his daughter. Leah dropped to her knees, sobbing. The night erupted around them, sirens, neighbors, chaos. But none of it mattered. Not in that moment. Only one truth remained. Ranger had remembered who he was, and he had never stopped being a hero. They were alive because Ranger had known, and he had acted, without question, without fear. He had saved them. The investigation began the very next day. Firefighters and forensic teams sifted through the charred remains of the house. The cause was clear, a gas leak from the home's old heating system. The pipes had corroded over the years, a slow degradation no one had noticed until it was too late. The ignition point, they determined, had likely come from the kitchen, perhaps a spark from an old outlet. The blast had traveled fast, fed by the gas accumulating in the vents. A perfect storm of neglect and bad timing. But one detail stunned investigators. The leak hadn't started the night of the explosion. Based on pressure readings and corrosion patterns, it had likely begun at least 2 weeks earlier. Leah and Daniel exchanged looks, and suddenly everything made sense. The pacing, the refusal to eat, the growling at the vent, the scratching at the basement door. The way Ranger had blocked Ava from crawling near the heater, every behavior they'd brushed off now rang in their ears like sirens. Leah felt a wave of guilt crash over her. "I thought he was just aging," she whispered. Daniel looked down at his hands, and I thought he was being stubborn, moody, but he was trying to tell us. Neither could look at the other for a long moment. The weight of realization was heavy, But underneath it was something else, too. Gratitude. If Ranger hadn't acted when he did, if they had dismissed his final warning, they would have lost everything, and they knew it. That night, after the chaos calmed and emergency crews left, Leah knelt beside Ranger, who was resting on a blanket in a neighbor's garage. She placed her hand gently on his head. "You knew? You tried to warn us. I'm so sorry we didn't hear you." Ranger didn't move much, but his eyes met hers, and that was enough. The days that followed were quiet and full of ash. Their home was gone. Everything they owned, baby clothes, wedding photos, books, keepsakes, vanished in flame. The insurance covered some of the loss, but not the ache of starting over. Still, they had each other, and they had Ranger. For a while they stayed in a small rental house on the edge of town. Leah spent her mornings watching Ava crawl across unfamiliar floors, while Daniel worked to rebuild their lives piece by piece. At night the three of them would sit close together. Ranger always nearby, his presence a comfort, a reminder. Eventually they made a decision. They would move, not just from the rental, but away from the place that now carried too many memories of what was lost. They found a small town 2 hours north, quiet and full of trees, a place where Ava could grow up safe, where they could build not just a house, but a life. Their new home was simple, but it had a large backyard and a sunlit porch. The first thing they unpacked was Ranger's blanket. He circled the porch once, then lay down, as if to say, "We're okay now." And in that moment, they believed it. The trauma hadn't disappeared, but they had survived, together. As weeks turned into months, life began to settle into a new rhythm. Ava grew stronger each day, her tiny legs wobbling through first steps across the wooden floor. And always, just a few feet away, was Ranger, watchful, calm, steady. They became inseparable. Ava learned her first words beside his fur. "Ta-da," "Mama," and soon after, "Sha-sha," her way of saying shadow, the name she gave him, unaware of the name he once had. Every nap she curled up against his side. Every scraped knee, every burst of laughter, he was there. Ranger didn't just guard her, he witnessed her becoming. Leah often watched them from the porch, heart full, eyes sometimes wet. There was something in the way Ava would place her hand on Ranger's back, firm, trusting, as if she knew, even at 1 year old, that this being had carried her through fire. Daniel, too, softened in ways he didn't expect. At night he sometimes found himself sitting beside Ranger, hand resting on his head, not as a thank you, but as recognition. Man to dog, soul to soul. Their bond wasn't built on tricks or training, it wasn't even built on rescue, it was built on survival. Ranger had become more than family, he was memory, he was protector. He was part of the very foundation they were rebuilding. And for Ava, he was the constant presence in a world that had already shown her both danger and deliverance. No words were needed, none ever would be. Life didn't return to what it was, it became something different, quieter, slower, and maybe in some ways more whole. Leah and Daniel often spoke about the night of the explosion, not with fear, but with awe. They didn't just survive, they were spared, and not by luck, but by a creature who had once been deemed broken, a rescue dog who, in truth, had rescued them. Their story spread, neighbors, then reporters, then people from other towns. Some wanted to donate, others just wanted to thank them for telling it. But for Leah, the most meaningful messages came from those who said, "I looked at my dog differently today," or "I listened more closely." That, she thought, was the point. Animals speak, not with words, but with presence, with action, with patience. And too often, we're just too busy, too tired, too loud to hear them. Shadow had never needed to be fixed. He only needed someone to believe in him, and in return, he had become their protector, their savior, and an irreplaceable part of their family. Now, years later, Ava still sleeps beside Ranger. Her hair has grown, her laugh is louder, but she still rests her hand on his back the same way, as if anchoring herself to something ancient and true. People talk about miracles, as things that defy logic, but Leah knows better. Sometimes a miracle is simply this: a dog with a broken past choosing to protect a future not his own, and doing it with everything he has. If this tale moved you, if you felt the tension, the heartbreak, and the triumph, please support our channel by hitting the like button and subscribing. Your support means the world to us and helps us bring more thrilling, emotional, and inspiring stories your way. Leave a comment below and let us know what you think. Do you believe dogs have an extraordinary sixth sense? Share your thoughts and personal stories with us. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.